We are in Genesis chapter 32. Genesis chapter 32. And it begins, now as Jacob went on his way, the angels of God met him. Jacob said when he saw them, "This is God's camp," or company. The Hebrew word there can be translated company. So he named that place Mahanaim. Mahanaim means two camps, which is an interesting word used to describe that place. Verse 3 then says, "Then Jacob sent messengers before him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom." Edom is going to factor into the history of Israel later on. Edom is going to be one of those countries that would afflict Israel and would oppose Israel. In fact, the book of Obadiah specifically addresses the Edomites and how they did not help their kindred in their affliction, but rather laughed at them and also assisted the enemies of Israel. So they would factor in to Israel's history. So this is where Esau had settled, the land of Seir, that's southeast of the land of Canaan. That's exactly where Edom was located. He also commanded them, saying, "Thus you shall say to my lord Esau, Thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen and donkeys and flocks and male and female servants, and I have sent to tell my lord that I may find favor in your sight." What Jacob is doing is he's telling his brother from a distance, "I'm returning home, I've become wealthy, and I desire peace." He's wanting to make sure everything is okay before he comes close to where Esau is. It's been, 20 years? The last time that he saw Esau, Esau wanted to kill Jacob. He was out for his blood. So he doesn't know if anything's changed. And he's wanting to take care of this as quickly as he can. The messengers return to Jacob. Now they go and tell Esau this. So what do they say when they return to Jacob? "We came to your brother Esau, and furthermore, he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." Now you think about this. Jacob's already apprehensive about meeting his brother. And by the way, he's bringing 400 people with him. Okay, he's going to kill me now. His worst fears seemed to be realized. He thought Esau was going to do violence to him and to his company with him. Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. If this was a mini-series or a TV show, you would hear the foreboding music playing in the background as he hears this news. And he divided the people who were with him and the flocks and the herds and the camels into two companies. For he said, "If Esau comes to the one company and attacks it, then the company which is left will escape." This is standard operating procedure for caravans in the ancient Near East. You divide it, if you're thinking that you're going to be facing opposition, you divide it into two companies. That way they'll have to divide their forces to attack. Or maybe just focus on one, the others can escape. Jacob said, "O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your relatives, and I will prosper you. I am unworthy of all the loving kindness and of all the faithfulness which you have shown to your servant. For with my staff only I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two companies. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau. For I fear him that he will come and attack me and the mothers with the children. For you said, I will surely prosper you and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which is too great to be numbered." So Jacob admits his unworthiness, and he asks for the help of Jehovah. This indicates that Jacob has grown a lot since he last was in Canaan. The last time he was in Canaan, he was deceiving his father with his mother's help. He had a knowledge of God, yes, and he respected and worshiped God, but not to the level and not to the depth that he is now. He now realizes he is not worthy of all the good things that he's received. He is finally turning to the faith, complete faith, of his forefathers. So, verse 13 says, he spent the night there. Then he selected from what he had with him a present for his brother Esau. Now, when we give people presents, we give, a wrapped up gift, maybe 2 or 3, maybe in a bag full of wrapped up gifts for our sons and daughters and our kinfolk. We think of in a small sense giving presents. Look at this gift that Jacob's going to give Esau. 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milking camels and their colts, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. That's a gift. Now, when you think about the monetary amount that this would equal in today's computation, this is huge, no matter how you compute it. He's sending all of this to his brother. He delivered them into the hand of his servants, every drove by itself, and said to his servants, "Pass on before me and put a space between droves." Now, Jacob's thinking ahead on this. He's planning this thing out. He's putting a space between each drove of this gift that he's giving. He commanded the one in front, saying, "When my brother Esau meets you and asks you, say, 'To whom do you belong? Where are you going? To whom do these animals in front of you belong?' Then you shall say, 'These belong to your servant Jacob. It is a present sent to my lord Esau, and behold, he also is behind us.'" So in other words, he's got this thing spaced out in droves. And each time one passes, the same thing would be said. He's emphasizing the magnitude of the gift to his brother, and he is increasing the effectiveness of the impact of that gift. Notice, then he commanded also the second and the third and all those who follow the droves, saying, "After this manner you shall speak to Esau when you find him, and you shall say, 'Behold, your servant Jacob also is behind us.' For he said, 'I will appease him with the present that goes before me. Then afterward I will see his face, perhaps he will accept me.' So the present passed on before him, while he himself spent that night in the camp." So he's got this thing planned out in his mind. He's thinking, Esau's still wanting to kill me. Maybe if I send all of this to him as a present, that'll soften him, that'll soften his heart, and maybe then he won't resort to violence. Now he arose that same night and took his 2 wives and his 2 maids and his 11 children and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. The Jabbok is modern-day Zerka. It enters the Jordan River midway between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. So if you have a map of Palestine in front of you, you know that the Sea of Galilee is up here at the north. The Jordan River runs down to the Dead Sea, which is at the southern end. Midway between those 2 large bodies of water is where we're talking, right here at the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream. And he sent across whatever he had. So he sends his family ahead. And now it says, "Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak." What? All of a sudden, everything's been focused on Jacob and Esau, and he's given this gift, and he's given instructions, and he sends his family ahead. And by the way, Moses just matter-of-factly says a man wrestled with him until daybreak. That's pretty major when you think about it. But was it an ordinary man? Interesting question. Watch this. When he saw that he had not prevailed against him, that is, when this man saw that he had not prevailed against Jacob, he touched the socket of his thigh. It's where the ball meets the joint right there at the hip. So the socket of Jacob's thigh was dislocated when he wrestled with him. Now think about this. This is not an ordinary man by any stretch of the imagination. It says he touches Jacob's hip, or there at the socket. The Hebrew word there can also be translated he struck. In other words, it's not just he touched. It's more, slap perhaps, maybe hit with a fist. We don't really know. Some way he impacted this side. Maybe the left. We don't know if it was right or left, but it was that part of his hip. Then he said, let me go. That is, this man said, let me go, for the dawn is breaking. But he said, that's Jacob talking, I will not let you go unless you bless me. That indicates to me that Jacob knew who he was wrestling with. By this point, he'd been wrestling all night with him. That's unusual when you think about it. You know, overnight, anything that happens overnight is going to make a big impact. But he's wrestling all night with this man, and finally Jacob recognizes who this person is. So he, that is, we're talking about this man, said to him, Jacob, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. He, this is the man, said, your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel. For you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. The name Israel means he who strives with God. Now we've got another layer of interesting intrigue added to this. So this person blesses Jacob and changes his name to Israel, which is the first time we've seen this name used. And he says, you have striven with God and prevailed. Notice further, and God and men. Then Jacob asked him and said, please tell me your name. I need to know who you are. You know, he's got an idea who this person is, but he wants to know his name. But he said, why is it that you ask my name? Why is it? Why is it that you ask my name? And he blessed him there. So Jacob named the place Peniel. You know what the word Peniel means? The face of God. For he said, I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been preserved. Now I'm going to open the floor to questions. I'm sure you got questions. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
It's some sort of manifestation and actually whoever God appointed there as that angel. In some translations it may say angel.
Right.
But message. God granted this, whoever this is God's representative.
Yeah. Let me give you another added layer of intrigue, just to complicate matters further. You turn over the book of Hosea. I'm using Rex Turner Sr.'s pronunciation. Hosea. Some people say Hosea. I go with Brother Turner, Hosea. Hosea chapter 12, verses 3 and 4. Talking about Jacob. In the womb he took his brother by the heel, and in his maturity he contended with God. Yes, he wrestled with the angel and prevailed. He wept and sought his favor. He found him at Bethel, and there he spoke with us. Even the Lord, the God of hosts, the Lord is his name. So Hosea says he wrestled with the angel. So Moses calls him a man. Jacob recognizes, I have seen the face of God and prevailed. The man, angel, question mark, names Jacob Israel, which means he who strives with God. I have seen the face of God, Jacob says, and my life has been preserved. He named the place Peniel, or the face of God. Israel means he who strives with God. So what can we draw from this? At the very least, this is the angel of the Lord. I don't think there's any doubt that we can say at the very least, this is the angel of the Lord. Steve did a great job some time back about talking about the angel of the Lord and all the times it's used in the Old Testament, the different usages. This is one of those places where, at the very least, it's the angel of the Lord. This is David talking, I believe it is the pre-existent Christ. the second person of the Godhead. Not Jesus. That body was made specifically for the pre-existent Christ when he came in the flesh to be our Messiah and to be our Savior. But the pre-existent Christ, the pre-existent Word, no doubt was with Israel when they came from Egypt all the way to Canaan, because Paul says that. They drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. He specifically says that Christ was with them all the way from Egypt to Israel, or to Canaan. But I think, this is again me speculating on this, I think this is the pre-existent Christ as well. Because of everything that's said in this context. Peniel, face of God. Israel, he who strives with God. Jacob says, I have seen the face of God and my life has been preserved. Something was different about this individual. Something was different. And Jacob recognized that. In the midst of his wrestling with him, he says, bless me. Why would he say bless me to just a man that had no connection with him? He recognized this was some individual from God, or maybe even God himself. He had that hunch, and his hunch was proven to be correct. Very interesting, very unusual incident. Why is this included by Moses in this text, in this context? Why did this happen to Jacob? Well, think about Jacob's mind right this moment. Jacob's mind was in turmoil. He was trying to figure out how would be the best way he could be able to meet his brother Esau, and Esau not take his life, and maybe not take the life of his family. He's going through a lot of stress. And perhaps the stress was so great on him, and the drama was so intense as far as Jacob's perspective was concerned, that the Lord chose this specific way of giving him some kind of comfort, of taking his mind off of all of this. This suggests to me that Jacob was no stranger to wrestling. Jacob, I would think probably that Jacob had wrestled with his brother when they were little, to an extent. And perhaps Jacob continued that as some kind of recreational practice. We don't know. He was strong enough that this individual could not prevail over Jacob. That speaks a lot for Jacob's physical stature and his strength. But at this point, he needed as much comfort and as much relief in his mind and his emotions and spirit as he could get. And this was perhaps a way that the Lord would provide that for him. Very unusual. You know, Moses has an eye for detail that perhaps we wouldn't. And this is one of those instances where his abilities and his talents come through in a great way. Well, now notice further. The sun rose upon him just as he crossed over Penuel. We're not told how long this lasted. And he was limping on his thigh. Get the picture in your head. Here comes Jacob to his family, and he's just, halting on his leg, because of what that individual had done. Therefore, to this day, this is Moses' divine commentary on this, the sons of Israel do not eat the sinew of the hip which is on the socket of the thigh, because he touched the socket of Jacob's thigh in the sinew of the hip. Right there. So they don't eat the meat from animals in that specific area. That is the sciatic muscle, from what I've been told. I'm not an expert on anatomy, but from what I've been told, that is a sciatic muscle. So they don't eat that. And that would further explain to Israelites why they didn't do that. At this point, they had been doing this, but some of them, perhaps the younger ones, would not know the reason. Well, now when they read this, the Israelite would say, now I understand why we don't do that. It's because of this very unusual incident. Any questions or comments before we get into chapter 33? Yeah. I noticed that. I'm not as conversant on Hebrew nearly as I am on Greek. The translation has, I don't know what their thinking was as far as translating the place Penuel and then Peniel. Perhaps it's just, you say tomato, I say tomato. That might be it. Sometimes when you have translation differences, it's more of a question of which one do you prefer. Take your pick. Do you want it this way or do you want it this way? It could be, if David Warren were here, he could tell us exactly what that's about and give us the reasoning behind it. But I'm not that conversant on Hebrew, so I would have to dig deeper to see. But that struck me too. Penuel and Peniel. Is there a major difference? I haven't seen anything just at first blush, in just what little I have seen in that text, that indicates there's any kind of major difference or major disagreement. They just sort of assume that I guess. But that's a good question. And if I do get the answer, I will definitely let you know that answer. It's not insignificant at all, by the way. Those kinds of things, come up in translations. Both in Old Testament and New Testament, you'll have a difference in the way some render a word, the difference being in spelling, the difference in pronunciation. And when you look at it in depth, you'll see, you could translate this way or this way. Again, it's just a matter of which one do you prefer. So that's my hunch, but I could be completely off base. So I'll try to get that answer as quickly as I can. Any other questions, comments before we get, yes? Jacob was trying his best to make sure everything was as it should be. Exactly. I agree with you. The problem in this whole family, going all the way back to Abraham, the underlying problem that really plagued this family, as we've already seen, was showing preference. Showing preference. Abraham did it. Isaac did it. Jacob is going to do it in spite of himself. And that's really a reoccurring theme throughout this book. Jacob at this point is wanting to make his life right and wanting to be as right as he possibly can. But sometimes you can't escape the habits of your family. You've got to try to overcome it as best you can. And it's going to continue to be a problem, as we're going to see, the showing preference and favoritism. And it leads to a major crisis, as we will see later on in this book. Yes? Yes. Good point. It's significant whenever a name is changed. And he chose just that moment, as you point out, to do what he did and then to change his name at that moment. It's a fascinating story. And just think about the power that this individual had, whether it's the angel of the Lord, whether it's the pre-existent Christ, just to touch or to strike, and it completely dislocates his hip. If you dislocate somebody's shoulder, dislocate somebody's hip, that's a pretty big impact. But yet this divine individual could just strike or touch, and it would do it. Amazing. It's just an amazing story all the way around. Any other comments, questions before we move? Yes? Yeah. Say it again. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we took the rib out of Adam's side. That's right. That's the first surgery ever performed. And he performed anesthesia on him, put him to sleep before he did it, and performed that surgery and made the woman out of the rib. So, the divine power of the Lord is just a very amazing thing to behold. If I may, I think I'm correct in saying this, and those of you who might know better can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Rex Turner Sr. speculated that surgery was performed by the pre-existent Christ in the Garden of Eden. Now, we don't have that written, of course, by Moses, but based on other passages such as this, where people are affected directly by God, he would say, well, perhaps the pre-existent Christ was there for the Father performing that surgery. It's possible. But it's just the divine power of God that's manifested in this and other places is just unreal. We just cannot fathom that. All right, chapter 33. Then Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. The Hebrew text says, he lifted up his eyes and, surprise, behold, here he is. Here's Esau, and he's got 400 people. You hear the dramatic music playing in the background, can't you? So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two maids. Now notice the preference. Talking about preference, notice this. He put the maids and their children in front, and Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. Notice his favorite, Rachel and Joseph, go in the back. And then the rest of it is by progression. Those who are dearest to him come last to ensure that at least they would escape. So there's that little preferential favoritism that's already manifested itself. But he himself passed on ahead of them and bowed down to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. Why did he bow down 7 times? 7 is the Hebrew perfect number, widely recognized as the perfect number of anything. So he bows 7 times to the ground in the side of Esau to indicate that he's being deferential. He's submitting. He is submitting to his brother. He has no ill will, no ill intent at mind. Now notice the reaction. Then Esau ran to meet him. Don't you know that Jacob was thinking as he seen Esau, this big bear of a man, hairy man, running toward him, he's thinking, here he go, we're about to meet it, and embraced him. How much of a shock would that have been to Jacob? And fell on his neck and kissed him. Kissed him on his cheek, his neck, hugging him, a big old bear hug, and they wept. Jacob's eyes are just flowing with tears, and Esau's eyes are flowing with tears, and they're hugging, and kissing each other, and just in complete emotional relief as far as Jacob is concerned. The hatred of the past seems to be gone at this moment, gone and forgotten. He, that is Esau, lifted his eyes and saw the women and the children and said, who are these with you? Esau, in the midst of his hugging and crying, he looks over his shoulder and sees all of who Jacob has. Who's this? The last time that Esau saw Jacob, Jacob was a single man. Now look at him. He's got all these children. So he said, the children whom God has graciously given your servant. Notice he's still being deferential to his brother. Then the maids came near with their children, and they bowed down. Leah likewise came near with her children, and they bowed down. And afterward Joseph came near with Rachel, and they bowed down. They've been instructed on what to do by their daddy and their husband. And so they do exactly as they've been told. And he said, that is Esau, what do you mean by all this company which I have met? All that he had sent ahead of him. Remember, all the droves, the gift. And he said, to find favor in the sight of my Lord. Just a little something I'm giving you. A little something, yeah. It's a huge gift. But Esau said, I have plenty, my brother. Let what you have be your own. I got plenty in my house. Jacob said, no, please, if now I have found favor in your sight, then take my present from my hand. For I see your face as one sees the face of God. And you have received me favorably. Now think about it in your mind. The last time that Jacob had seen Esau face to face, was Esau favorable at all toward him? No, not at all. If looks could kill, you've heard that phrase many times in the past. Think about the looks that Esau had been giving his brother. Just wait until Daddy passes, and then we're going to settle up. Jacob knew what he had in mind. That's one of the main reasons why he left. But now things 20 years later have changed dramatically. He sees Esau, and Esau's countenance is not one that says, okay, here we are, we're fixing to get this settled. No, Esau was like a different man. Completely different. He's looking at his long-lost brother. All the conflict, all of the cataclysm, the emotional cataclysm, emotional conflict of the past is now gone. And Esau looks at his brother as a long-lost friend, a long-lost family member, and we're back together. So that's Jacob's reaction. Please take my gift which has been brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have plenty. So you've got plenty, I've got plenty. Take my gift. Thus he urged him, and he took it. So Esau takes that generous present that Jacob gives. Then Esau said, let us take our journey and go, and I will go before you. But he said to him, that is Jacob, my Lord knows that the children are frail, and that the flocks and herds which are nursing are a care to me. And if they are driven hard one day, all the flocks will die. Please let my Lord pass on before his servant, and I will proceed at my leisure, according to the pace of the cattle that are before me, and according to the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord at Seir. Think about it now. All of this stress, all of this pressure is now gone. It's now a big relief. Not only the pressure against Jacob, but also the pressure with Leah and Rachel, the pressure with his sons, pressure with his servants. They've all been under this great amount of stress, and they've been driving to get to where they're going to go. And Jacob knows if they're driven hard again, it's going to be cataclysmic on his company. So he says, let me take my time getting to you. And so Esau said, please let me leave with you some of the people who are with me. But he said, what need is there, or why this? Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord. So Esau returned that day on his way to Seir. Jacob journeyed to Succoth. The word Succoth means booths. And built for himself a house and made booths for his livestock. Therefore, the place is named Succoth. Booths, tents, temporary settlement, in other words. The name stuck because of what he did. Now, Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem. The name Shechem means shoulder. Shechem is 40 miles north of Jerusalem, between Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. That gives you an idea. Right there in Canaan. When he came from Padanaram and camped before the city, he bought the piece of land where he had pitched his tent from the hand of the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. The Hebrew, from what I understand from those who know it better than I, the Hebrew phrase there, 100 pieces of money, is not as clear as that translation indicates. We're not really certain about the amount. It's a guess. The translators are guessing at the amount of this. The amount is uncertain because the Hebrew term specifically used here is obscure. It's an obscure term, which is interesting. So how much did he pay for it? We don't really know for certain, for dead level certain. It was a sizable amount by any measuring stick. Then he erected there an altar. We have to assume that Jacob worshiped. Everywhere he erected an altar, he would worship God. We have to assume that he did the same here. And called it El Elohe Israel. El Elohe Israel. El and Elohe means God. Elohim, one of the Hebrew names of God. So what is this name? What does this name mean? God, the God of Israel. El Elohe Israel. Names had a big significance with Israelites, with Jews. And the names of places, the names of individuals have a significant place. And this is one of those. Jacob at this point in his life was blessed beyond measure physically. He was also being blessed by the Lord in many other ways. He finally had a knowledge of God that was much, much deeper than what he had growing up, where he wasn't perhaps paying as much attention as he should have to his father's teaching. Perhaps Isaac, the older he got, the more he allowed to slip. That would be the case with Esau, but for sure. But with Jacob, Jacob was led more by his mother in those days. But now 20 years later, with all of what's happened, with all of the maturity that Jacob's had, he now sees things from a different perspective. He's wrestled with the Lord, with God, and he's prevailed, and he's seen the face of the Lord, and he has not been killed. And now he's reunited with his brother, and everything seems to be good. Oh, but this is Genesis. This is Moses writing. You think everything's going fine, and all of a sudden, boom, something happens. Well, when we get into chapter 34, oh, you better believe something's going to happen. The book of Genesis has fascinated not only those who are religious, deeply religious, but those who are maybe semi-religious and even those who are not even interested in Judaism. They'll read the book of Genesis and they will recognize it for what it is, apart from the question of whether it's written from God himself. Just from the literature of the book of Genesis, it plays out better than any kind of nighttime miniseries or epic movie that you see on the big screen. The drama that's taking place in these relationships between families, and the drama that happens with people who at one point were good and all of a sudden they display a lack of character, and those that display a lack of character that then have a change of heart and turn toward the good. You can't write this better. This plays out like a Hollywood script. And it's not for nothing that we look at Moses and we see his qualifications and we understand, of course. Why not? Moses was being trained in part to be a writer of history. That was part of his education in Egypt. He was being trained to be a pharaoh, let's just be honest. But part of that training, part of that education was how to write. Not just how to chronicle things, just facts and figures, but how to write, to put thoughts together, put sentences together, to express oneself. All of that ability, all of that talent, all of that education was utilized by the Lord in writing these books. And I can't see how anybody else could have written Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. I don't see it. That is in the ancient Near East. He was the only one that had those qualifications. He was the only one that could have done that and done it well. The Lord knew what he was doing when he chose Moses, is what I'm trying to say. And when you come to Moses' story in the book of Exodus, and you see what Moses writes about himself, Moses isn't sparing on his own person. Moses doesn't mince words. He doesn't hold back. He tells you his flaws and his strengths. And he's upfront about it. And that's the hallmark of a good writer. A person that writes history or a person that writes a biography, if he tells the flaws and the strengths and tells it in a compelling way, that's the hallmark of an outstanding writer. And Moses is that, if nothing else. And so when he's describing all of this drama that takes place in the family of Jacob and what's about to happen in chapter 34, you better believe he knows how to tell a story. Any questions or comments before we end? Yes, sir.
Another one of those bad family habits was to continue to carry those little local
Yes. Some of those traits, some of those habits. Not just that, but an Israelite reading these things would say, this is a long-standing problem. This is something that's plagued our generations for a long, long time. It didn't just start with us, in other words. It started way, way back. And a lot of times you'll find that in families. You'll find, well, this didn't just start with me. This has been going on for a long time. I'm just the latest in a long line of individuals that's doing this, that's practicing this, and I've got to stop that habit. Well, there's going to come a time in the book of Genesis where they've got to stop this habit. Not just the idols, but also stop the habit of showing favoritism. And it will come. It will come. And Moses is just building along that line to where when it happens, you'll see, aha, that's